Hello and welcome to Film and Game Composers. I'm Mina Shamali, and today we are interviewing Mr. Tree Adams. Before he started composing for film and TV, he was already a rock star. He's been belting out vocals and wailing guitars in rock bands for 10 years, performing, touring, making records. And you would have heard his magnificent guitar sensibilities all over the TV series Californication, which he scored with Tyler Bates. You would have heard his music floating, soaring across shows like Perception, Sirens, and Franklin and Bash, as well as films like Keith and Common Outlaws. His most recent work can be heard in Season 2 of Legends and Season 3 of The 100 on the CW. Hello, Tree.
What's happening? Good to see you.
You too. So let's get stuck into it. So you're a guitarist and a vocalist. You're also classically trained in piano, clarinet, and flute early on in your life. Do you actually still play them?
Well, it's funny. I don't have a flute at the moment, but I have a clarinet, and I use that occasionally.
No.
I played the Duke as well. I have a couple
lovely.
other like wind instruments lying around, and I'll get into that from time to time. But I'm more of a guitar player, and
Nice.
I'll do whatever I need to do in order to score these things. Sometimes I don't even play on anything at all. I just write it, and other people play it.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Is there an instrument you really want to play? Or want to learn how to play?
Yeah, I would love to play the cello. To me, that's a string instrument, so it's probably I probably could find my way through it. Just getting the bowing technique. Ultimately, I think that would be one of my favorite things to learn. So we'll talk in a year and see if I've got it.
I feel like the cello is the thing that every composer wants to do at some point.
Well, it's the most expressive one. It's so much like the human voice. It really speaks to you.
True. And so before that, you'd been a full-time rocker you've been performing, you've been touring, making records, and so you did that for a while before you made the switch to composing for film and TV. Was getting your foot in the door into the film and TV industry comparable to when you got your foot in the door in the record industry? Or was it maybe easier, harder? Or what do you feel?
Well, I think they're both very difficult. And yeah, there are certain similarities. You have to, obviously hone your craft. You have to figure out the gear, and you have to then go knocking on doors and basically kind of you got to get your sleeves rolled up and sort of go out there and eat no for breakfast. You know what I mean? People will turn you down left and right, and you have to be able to kind of battle through layers of discouragement.
Yeah.
I think in composing there are opportunities to sort of apprentice for people. I didn't really have as much of that in my path, but I think that is one that I see a lot, and that's one that I have a lot of people who work, for me, under me, and I enjoy that kind of give and take as well. And I think that that's one aspect of the sort of composing field that can be really helpful. Like if you can get on somebody's team,
yeah,
and you begin, whatever it is, making coffee, bouncing MIDI files, stemming, just some of the sort of more mundane tasks. And then you kind of work your way into more creative things like building sound libraries or like, doing some additional programming or, whatever, even formatting sessions and creating tempo and meter maps to get as dorky and specific as I can.
yeah.
Some of this stuff becomes... then you make yourself like indispensable to somebody. And then as you go, eventually you can kind of work your way into a position where you can get opportunities to write underneath somebody, either as a ghost or as a credited writer, or where you'll get some cue sheet credit, some back end. And eventually then hopefully you can move into a position where you can take on these jobs yourself and you know how to kind of captain it. But it's tough, it's tough.
Is it easier in a place like LA where there is an abundance of composers who need help?
I would say probably there are more composers here than in other parts of the world. But that said, I think the film and television and game world is blooming all over the globe. So I think there's more and more opportunities elsewhere. And I think the other thing that's really cool is that the tools at our disposal are kind of, amazing and getting to
Yeah.
be more accessible. You know what I mean? You got a laptop and, maybe $1,000 to throw around. You could put together like a really serviceable rig,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
just to get rolling. You know what I mean? Whereas it used to be when I started this, I mean, you needed like 50, 60, $70,000 just to like start. You know what I
And what did
mean?
you start with? Like a Logic Power Mac? What was it? Like 8500? I read it somewhere. It was just like,
I started with a Power Mac 8500 because
there
that
you
was
go.
like state of the art, 1990, I can't remember, five maybe. And and I didn't know how to use a computer, so that was also a complete disaster. And the thing would crash. Like if you looked at it funny, it would crash. If you breathed too many, like I got superstitious. I was like, okay, I'm wearing the blue hat. It's gonna crash again. Got to put on the black hat. Okay, it's crashing again. Okay, you got to stop running water in the faucet. It's gonna crash. Like everything would make it crash. Um, yeah, and then I was using Logic back when eMagic had designed
Yeah.
it, and that was, man, that program was a disaster, and the manual was like impossible to read. It was, a German company, and the English was kind of whack, and uh, yeah, but I mean, it's gotten to the point where now, I mean, with GarageBand you can do
Yeah.
something decent. I mean, it's really the tools are getting great, but
No, that's pretty cool.
there's really no substitute though for like doing these jobs and working to picture, and that becomes the thing that's the skill that people will hire you for. It's not really what kind of music can you make and what is your taste. It's how well do you integrate music with picture? How well do you read the scene? And ultimately for me, it's become kind of learning about working with writers and
Yeah.
understanding what their intentions are and, how to kind of manifest what their vision is with
Yeah.
music. Because like if you're working on one of these things, you've got 5 minutes to like, watch it. You're coming in at the last second. They've been living with it, writing it, rewriting it, editing it, re-editing it, putting different music against it for months, sometimes a year.
Yeah.
And so for you to kind of be able to come in and read what's going on is the real challenge. And that's the thing that I think we have to develop as composers.
Absolutely. And I hear that you're married to a writer and that you're a bit of a writer yourself.
Yeah, yeah, you got the whole skinny.
I got
Yeah,
those kind of, yeah.
my wife is a writer. I wanted to be a writer. I always wrote lyrics and poetry and studied literature and I am a big fan of that art form and and the written word and story is to me that's what we're working with here. We're just developing it into other dimensions. And so I do like to kind of start at that level, like
Yeah.
the script level or even just, trying to understand like what is the scene about, because sometimes you look at it and it's like you can get lost or distracted by one particular, effect or camera angle or something, and you may lose sight of, the big picture because especially when you're watching a scene over and over again, you're watching the same minute or the same 5 seconds even over and over and over again.
Yeah.
You can't see what's happening in the full 2 hours. It's like very hard to keep that
Oh yeah.
perspective.
It's,
You know?
absolutely. It's like you get kind of tunnel visioned into it. It's
Yeah.
like,
And we need to because we need to master those 5 seconds. You know what I
yeah.
mean? We need to get every nuance right. But the fact is that, the person we're working for usually, the director, the producer, whoever they may be, they usually their job is obviously to maintain that, 5,000 foot view.
Yeah.
But we got to be able to speak to them on that level. We got to be able to be a collaborator, and
Mm.
that's truly the challenge, which is why I think, the apprenticeship thing is really useful in this business because you can't come into it cold and know how to do it. You really
Oh,
need somebody
absolutely
to
not.
show
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. I was, it's only really this year for me, for example, that I've really learned the idea of working a picture and the technicalities and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, because before that, I was like, yeah, it'll be easy. I'll do it, the kind of thing. And I was sitting there, I was like, oh my God, this is driving me crazy.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how many times,
Sorry, before
and
last year, I mean, yeah.
I've had people say this to me, when I first started too, but I've had so many people who work for me, show me a piece to a scene and I'll say, this is a really great piece of music for another show. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's like, it's like, what a great piece, but it just doesn't suit what we're seeing. And I've had that same thing, like I remember I was working with this director, Mario Van Peebles, on this movie, Hard Luck. And I wrote this thing that was like, to me, it was like the greatest like chase action sequence. And I was so proud of it. And I recorded all these strings and big battle drums and all this stuff on it. It sounded like massive. And I played it for him and I was so proud. I was pumping it up. And he turned to me and he was like, Tree, that is a great piece for somebody else's movie. I was like, oh man, you know,
Oh Lord.
and he explained to me that basically like I had scored it like it was like a big budget movie. He was like, this would be great if like Michael Mann needed you for this. But he's like, we don't have big bucks. We got indie money here.
Yeah.
This is like a $3 million movie, not a $60 million movie. So you need to do the score that is commensurate with the vision here. And the vision is, we're telling the audience that the envelope of what they can expect is not out here, it's in here.
Yeah.
And it was a really valuable lesson. And I don't know, things like that are sort of the things we wrestle with, I guess, every day.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Obviously, with our world of composing, the unique challenge tends to be that we're always called upon for many different sensibilities, many different things, and you have a very diverse body of work, thematically and musically, and so it speaks to how much you always rise to that kind of challenge. How do you actually approach developing your musical diversity? Because you were saying it's not really about the kind of music that you're doing; it's about how you work the picture, which is fantastic. But being able to do these things, being able to write something for Californication and for Perception and for Keith and for I don't know what else. I'm forgetting your whole body of work.
I think it's like you get the opportunity to work with somebody, and then they will take you across like to another genre on their next project. I remember when I first was starting to do this, I would write orchestral music. I had been classically trained, but I hadn't worked with orchestras.
Yeah,
I had worked with, ensembles, bass, guitar, drums, keys, your basic kind of small ensembles. But like, in rock, jazz, funk, blues, that world. And I had good material in that area, and that I could churn out and produce quickly and well, and it was kind of legit.
yeah,
But and I was able to get a couple little opportunities through that, but I would do stuff that was not in my wheelhouse and submit stuff with it. I would do all this orchestral work, and I had bad samples. The libraries weren't as good back then, and we
yeah,
used I remember like Gigasampler was like state of the art, and the bit rate was low, and it just wasn't happening. And so I'd hand in these things, and I'd be like competing with, you know, some big composer who's got a whole 100-piece orchestra with my little samples. And it finally occurred to me, like, nobody's going to hire me to do an orchestral project when I have never done it before,
yeah,
and I'm using these samples. So the only way you can get into that is to, like, get hands-on experience. Well, after getting a few gigs in the door that, in my wheelhouse through this kind of ensemble guitar stuff,
yeah,
I had some directors who were like, all right, well, it would be cool if we had some strings here too. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take the budget for this movie. Like Keith, I did it on that movie, Keith, or I don't know. There's a whole bunch of them. Emilio, I did it on like, the first 6 or 10 movies. I basically was like, I'm going to pay for my education. I'm going to record strings. I'm going to get some help because I haven't done this yet.
yeah.
And, I know how to write classical music, but there's all of these tiny little things you don't know until you do it.
Yeah,
And so I got help from some really great orchestrators along the way and, managed to then like get myself some experience, get myself a demo with real orchestra. And, you could do that now. There's places you can like, you can go and pay for, a few hours of orchestral recording, like, remotely or something like that. And, and then eventually I was like, okay, I got a sizable, demo here.
Yeah.
And then I had a couple people like this producer, Ken Biller, who decided, to hire me because we were friends and, he thought I could handle it. And he heard
Hmm.
my body of work and he was like, all right, he can handle this orchestral thing. We're going to do an orchestral score. We're going to hire an orchestra for every episode of this show, Perception. And so for 3 years, like he kind of put me into that. And then by the end of that, I was like, I got this down.
That's
And now I do it all the
fantastic.
time, and it was just kind of getting somebody to kind of take a chance on you moving sideways.
Mm.
Um, and I do a lot of like electronic, composing, like, beats and, uh, I do a lot of hip hop. I had this director, Simone Bartasaghi, that I've worked with a couple of times. And we did a movie. And then the next movie, he was like, you know what? They want me to use like a dubstep soundtrack. I really want to hire you, but like, do you know how to do dubstep? And I was like, all right, how about this? Give me a few weeks. Let me make some stuff. Let me send it to you. Let me research, and then we'll talk about it. And
Yeah.
I sent him some stuff. He played it for the producers. They were like, yeah, it's good. Use him. And so then I did a dubstep score.
Nice.
Uh, so sometimes it's like you get a benefactor, somebody who's like, I like working with you. I like your sensibility. I like the collaboration.
Mm.
We're going to go do something over here. You know what I mean?
That's fantastic. And I think it's all really interesting when you find good people to work with and who believe in what you can do. And then I remember watching an interview with Hans Zimmer, and it's funny. It was the roundtable interview. Hans Zimmer and I think Danny Elfman. I think might have been like was it, Marco Beltrami and like two other composers, and oh yeah, and Trent Reznor and that kind of thing. And they're all talking about what they were working on. You got Hans Zimmer there talking about working with Chris Nolan on Interstellar, and it's just like the most beautiful, like enviable story ever. And everyone else is like, "Oh yeah, I only didn't have time to do this. I didn't have time to do that. I didn't have time to do that." But like Hans is like, "Oh yeah, like Chris believes in what we were doing, and we had enough time." And he like before we even started the movie, I started writing the first score. It was amazing. So like the
Yeah.
idea of benefactors really believe in what you do is
Well, I think one thing that Hans does that's cool is he writes a score suite.
yeah,
Before anything really gets done to picture, I hear, and I think that's a good idea if you have the luxury of time.
yeah,
And it's a little more work for you on one level because sometimes you write a score suite and not all of it gets used.
yeah,
But if you write a 15-minute piece of music that embodies the things that you discuss with your director or producer and the things maybe that you're picking up from the script,
yeah,
that can be, super powerful and useful down the line. You know what I mean? And it'll answer questions. You're like, okay, what represents this, feeling the most that we need here, this love theme or this
yeah,
tragic thing that he's going through. And you can go back to it, time and again. And it's useful if you're up against it time wise and you got people working underneath you,
yeah.
you can point to it. You could be like 3 minutes in, that's the tragic theme.
Mm.
Grab 8 bars of that and make a little playground for me to monkey around on and I'll get in there.
So
Yeah.
is that kind of something you've been able to do from time to time, or a
Yeah.
lot? I don't know
Yeah,
how,
no,
how you've been
for
able to.
sure. I mean, what's I think one of the challenges we face on the composing front is with each project, there's sort of a different timeline. There are time and budget constraints to be taken into consideration. And I always think of it as like it's a body of water. We have to build a vessel to get across.
Yeah,
And it's not always the same body of water. Sometimes it's raging, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's long, and you just got to build the right vessel. For some of these projects, I will try and get, I have a team working with me. Like I got 3 guys. Sometimes it is more, sometimes
yeah.
it's less, but it's basically in
So it's
there.
your core team, three guys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I basically, we've kind of got a system for how we approach some of these things. And particularly if you have a show that's like this show, The 100 that we're doing, for instance,
yeah,
right now, it's nonstop music. Literally, it does not stop. And so that's 44 minutes of music a week or
hmm,
whatever it is. And in some cases, they're reusing certain pieces of my music in the temp score.
yeah,
And in some cases, it's to indicate that it's somebody's theme or it's a certain, motif that we go to again and again. And That's what the producers want. So basically, we'll call it a box queue. Like I'll have one of our guys go and find that session, make a new session to picture, sync it up, and then I'll get in there and like make adjustments. Like
Yeah.
maybe there's a motif that occurs that we don't need because that's for something else, and or maybe it needs some more motor.
Mm.
And so we do a certain amount of that so that I don't spend an inordinate amount of time like knocking myself off,
Yeah.
essentially.
Obviously, that
Um,
person's usually your music editor. Wouldn't that be the case, or was that
well,
something in the show?
sometimes you can have it be a music editor, but some music editors are usually working with audio that's
Yeah.
finished and
Ah, okay.
mixed, right?
Yeah.
Whereas what I'm talking about is taking the original session, which has
Yeah.
all of the elements, which I'm talking MIDI and audio,
Yeah.
so that you can really make different kinds of adjustments.
Mm.
And for instance, sometimes they'll put like two or three of my pieces together, and maybe they're in different keys and different tempos, but I want it smooth out. So maybe we
Aha.
transpose something, or maybe by slowing it down in this one section, it eases us into this other thing, or makes
Yeah.
it easier to hit the downbeat over here. It's a complicated matrix, but having the raw sessions
Yeah.
and being able to work well with those can be a huge help.
That's pretty cool. So, how did you get involved? How did you first get involved in the 100?
Well, I think a lot of the people involved in it, working on the show, are guys I've worked with on other shows. Um, I'm not sure exactly the story of why they made the change musically. I think they were let me just say, I think it sounded like maybe they were having some difficulty in the process,
Yeah.
in the with the previous situation. And so the associate producer, Tim Scanlon, is someone I worked with a bunch. One of the main writers in the writer's room, Javier Grigio Marxwatch, uh, is somebody who had a show called The Middleman that I scored for him.
Yeah.
A couple of the editors I knew, the music editor I knew. And so I think a lot of people were telling Jason Rothenberg, who's the showrunner, hey, if you're going to make a change, I know a guy who can kind of come in and is good at kind of jumping in midway and, getting it on course. And I think the thing that they really wanted to do was to sort of, I think that in the previous scores, the tone was pretty good,
Yeah.
and they wanted to use basically the same box of crayons, as it were, but they wanted to have more of like a memorable thematic kind of essence going on,
Yeah.
so that you really could kind of like accompany some of the storytelling and some of the characters and some of the worlds with a little bit, more of memorable melodies and stuff. It's one of those kind of situations where you have so many characters,
Yeah.
and so many different worlds that they go into, and they all really need a little bit of a distinct flavor to help with the storytelling.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I kind of got brought in. I think, um, the people I've worked with have know that I'm pretty good at that, and sort of recommended me for it.
No, that's pretty
So that
cool.
was, yeah,
And
yeah.
so obviously there's several points of view within this show based on the premise. Because the premise here is people living up in a space station, and then like 100 of them get sent down. I'm talking like back in season 1. I haven't
Right.
followed how far along they've gone, and then like they discover they're not alone on this post-apocalyptic Earth. And is it fair to say there's a whole lot of survivalist conflict?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's exactly what it is, and it's basically, they're all down from space now, so like
Yeah.
everybody's on Earth,
Hmm.
and hijinks ensue. There are
Absolutely.
all these different tribes kind of warring, and it's a lot of fun, and
What kind of stuff do you get to do as a result?
well, it's a pretty open, terrain, right?
Yeah.
I'm looking at something kind of dusty, almost like Mad Max looking, a
Hmm.
lot,
Yeah.
where you could the palette is wide open in terms of like contemporary sounds, synth or like soundscape kind of, playing with delays or, oscillators, and getting just weird sounds, and that it soaks that up really well.
Yeah.
It soaks up the really big like epic battle stuff like orchestral and drums really well. And honestly, because we have all these different sort of races,
Yeah.
it wants to get like a world touch. So
Yeah.
I'm doing a lot of like I'm playing a lot of oud. I'm playing, a lot of Duke, as I said.
Nice.
I got a little daff that I'm banging
Oh,
around on
that's
a lot.
awesome.
So it's got a little bit of, a little flavor to it. And I think because everything sort of feels sort of homemade, and there's a lot of kind of just clanky metals and wood and stuff. It's just like you
Yeah.
can bang on anything.
That,
It's really it eats it all up really nicely.
what's your favorite kind of new experiment that you've gotten to do for the 100?
I think we've done a lot of stuff with delays, like really
Hmm.
like weird modulating delays, and it's just gotten real experimental at times. Like because there's all of this sort of well, this I can't really get into, but there's a new component to the show
Hmm.
uh, that's sort of technology based.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, it's a lot of fun because it offers commentary about what we're experiencing in today's world.
Yeah.
With living through like virtual reality, and everybody on social media and like
And
phones, and
interviewing people across the world over Skype.
exactly. But so there's a way to kind of like, I think, satirize a little bit about what's happening in our world today. That component is both new to the show and offers me a really fun opportunity to sort of like get way out there.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying all sorts of things with sounds. I mean, we got your basic, big brass and drums and all of the kind of typical dramatic filmic stuff, but then we're also really playing around with some weird delays and and just soundscape stuff, which is it's the new world we're in. It's
That's
a lot of fun.
that's pretty awesome. Well, let's talk a bit about Legends. So, Legends, you came in on season 2, and so if anyone doesn't know, Legends is a show starring Sean Bean. He's an undercover agent with a mysterious past, and then he kind of assumes a different identity for every case. So he's like a real master of disguise. Um, and but season 2 is completely different in a way. So, and that's where you kind of got involved. So what happened there?
Well, season two, this guy Ken Biller, the showrunner, came in. He's a friend of mine, and we had done a show Perception together. He was brought in to completely rechange the show, reboot it, give it a whole new world. Um, and so what the show becomes more about is sort of like peeling back the layers of his identity, Sean Bean's identity.
Yeah,
Um, as he supposedly was wounded and then doesn't know like who he was, and we kind of find out gradually throughout the season in layers, you know, the depth of like how screwed up his past is, and
yeah.
he's been on a lot of different sides, and it's a really interesting story, really well done. They shot it in Prague and in Paris, and it's just gorgeous the way it was shot. Um, so there's all these themes in there for like his identity and peeling back those layers. And I think, we use like a little solo cello, but it's more, again, like contemporary soundscape stuff, very subtle for the most part. Um, I think because it's in Europe, there's something about like these spy sort of chase things in Europe that like I can't help it. I just
Yeah.
gotta go Mission Impossible with it sometimes, or I gotta like go James Bond. Like so there's a bit of that. You got to. I mean, and then he has like a little guitar spy thing that I did. It's I was like, all right, it's a genre thing. We got to do our little guitar spy
Yeah.
thing. So we got that. Um, but that show, I got to say, it's really well made. Um, the second season is very different than the first season. Not to say the first season is well made, but it's a different show altogether. So
Yeah.
I would check it out. I think the first season's on Netflix. I'm not sure. The second season may be.
Well, I'll have to check it out. In Australia, our Netflix library is like a quarter of what it should be. Really,
Is that right? Is that right?
it's pitiful, man. Like we still get fantastic shows, and all the Netflix original content is there. So they didn't shortchange us on that.
But I mean,
But
why wouldn't they just like, what is it? Is it just they got to make more deals? I mean,
uh,
it's not that hard for them to put it up there, right?
look, when you have a couple of hours for rage, I will have that conversation with you. Oh Lord. Anyway, so well, I suppose what I want to ask is, did you have a particular process in trying to find the sound of the show? What can you tell us about that?
Well, Ken and I have worked together for years, so we have a pretty good shorthand. There was also a writer producer on the show named Raf Green who Ken brought in to also kind of be part of the brain trust. And Raf was really big on minimalism, having it be really sort of sparse, having a real gentle touch. And I think it was smart because the performances are so good. The acting is so good that you don't need to hit it that hard. And I know nowadays, on a lot of these kind of like network certainly and premium cable, like there's just the tendency to use too much music.
Yeah.
And for the music to be kind of thick and editorializing a bit, saying a lot. Which is normal because, I mean, editors, they're trying to sell their cut. Everything gets sent into the studios give their notes. They want to see something that sounds finished, so they want effects and music in there already. And it just, stuff gets piled on and on and on. And it just gets, I get that. But I think we did a good job of peeling it back.
Yeah.
Taking cues out here and there. I'm not precious about it. I mean, if it helps the scene, it's good.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, let's take it out. And
I think that's one of the biggest
also,
pieces of advice for composers is don't be precious about what you're writing.
Oh,
ever.
Yeah. Hey, man, it ain't your record, If it's your record, then be precious about it. You know what I mean? This is not your record. I mean, that said, you got to fight for what you believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you really think that a scene will play better, if you have the scene's best interests in mind when you speak, and that's always your, ground zero, people A, will listen to you more often, and B, I think you're in a better place to fight for the music. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what you should do, because if you don't, actually, it undermines your cause ultimately, right? The show won't do as well. That's not good for you.
Yeah.
Your music will not play as well as it should. That's not good for you. So,
Yeah.
show first. So yeah, I mean, I think, but with the actual sound that we were looking for with Perception, I mean, Legends. Sorry, yeah. It was like that was the mandate, was to kind of like do something minimal, be tasteful, and then in terms of like some of the kinds of sounds that we liked, they played me a couple of pieces that, and I don't even know what scores they were from, but they had very unfamiliar instrumentation, which is to say, like, look, I've told you, we use guitar, we use cello, we use some of these things that are familiar.
Yeah.
But a lot of the sort of backdrop of the show, I would say you would point to it and you'd be like, it's music, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And so it actually becomes difficult to talk about because it is, as I said, like it's soundscape.
Yeah.
And we did a bit of experimenting and came up with very subtle sort of pulsing elements or textural elements that are like not just spit out of like, a virtual instrument, but like things that we kind of welded.
Yeah.
And, that to me gave it a lot of character. And I think it sort of gave a visceral tension at times, or just like a little, just a little atmosphere that it needed. And, it was a really good experience, that one.
That's pretty cool. And now I heard that you're a fan of Arrow, the TV show, because of your son.
Wow, yeah. You got this.
And it's just like the interesting thing is, it seems this whole season 2 of Legends has the same thing as Arrow, where it's always told like there's a current day story and a flashback, and this dual story kind of taking place. And because I'm a big fan of Arrow as well, so I like, you'd notice some of the things that are specific to the island or specific to Hong Kong or specific to whatever, and then the things that are in the present day and how they're tied together sometimes. Like, did you get to do something like that in Legends? I just use that as a frame of reference, not saying you. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Yeah, they're very different shows. I mean,
Hmm.
the Arrow being kind of like in that Marvel world, it's, things are a little more arch, and there's a lot of these sort of ostinatos,
Yeah.
that are going, you know, I think in a similar way, though, as you're saying, we did run some strands, like we would, because we were constantly jumping around in time, and you have to kind of help inform your audience where we are in the
Yeah.
timeline. I mean, we would see often like there's like a card up there, like a Chiron saying, okay, Prague, 1995 or whatever, or 2005 or whatever. But we would also kind of accompany some of that stuff with certain palette shifts. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um, and I think, for instance, when we go back to like our lead character, his youth,
Hmm.
we were more in like traditional ensemble stuff,
Yeah.
like orchestral stuff. Um, and I think there was one particular thing, actually, it was Prague, I think in 2005, there was like a series of events in there with these terrorists, and like that gets its own kind of layer. And it's like, a lot of, again, sort of that Middle Eastern palette in
Yeah.
there with that, a lot of different drums that are sort of more familiar kind of world drums. Um, so, I think some of the different time periods each had like a little bit of an identifying layer. Um, and, keeping it cohesive is always the challenge then. So we would have certain motifs that we would then run through all that, to keep it feeling
Yeah.
like the same.
That was pretty cool. All right,
Yeah.
so you also do some solo stuff where you got the Tree Adams band and the Howling Volts band. It's
Right.
a duo with your friend, and so you're always like working your guitar and vocal chops on stage. So do you get to do that a whole lot, or like quite often,
Not
or
as, I mean, I do, but not as much as I used to, for sure. Not as much as I'd like to,
yeah?
because I'm just,
I heard some of that
buried
stuff,
with
man. It's
these
fantastic.
deadlines. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I don't have a project, that's what I do. Is I make records, and I, will tour or like play some shows. I do the Tree Adams band here in town, and I got kind of a steady kind of group that I'll do that with, and we'll play around, and
Yeah,
we'll travel a little bit, but usually it's pretty local. And then I have this project, the Howlin' Volts, with my friend Chris Shiani, who's a fantastic blues guitar player in New York, and he and I have known each other since we were 3 years old. So
yeah,
we have some funny pictures of us when we were kids
yeah.
to
I saw that.
circulate.
Don't. I'll throw it
Uh,
up. I'll throw it up in the
there you
when I
go.
publish it.
Yeah, so he and I, like he's in New York. I'm from New York originally.
Yeah,
And so we'll play back there often, and he'll come out here and we'll play here too in LA. And we did record with the Preservation Hall Jazz Band horns on the Howlin' Volts record, which was pretty cool. There in New Orleans.
nice.
So hopefully we'll get down to New Orleans to play with those guys soon. That's kind of been something we've been thinking about. So.
Do any of the people who are in your bands kind of make it into some of your scores?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the
That's
time.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's I love to use the players I play with to play every time I can. Um, I know, like I'll give you an example. Like Sean Hurley's the bass player on the Howlin' Volts stuff. Um, he plays with John Mayer and has played with a lot of other good cats. And yeah, I used him on a bunch of stuff we were recording. I guess we did Franklin and Bash together.
Yeah,
Um, I always try to sort of, use the guys who are playing with me,
keep it in the
whenever we can.
family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Uh,
you get the shorthand,
yeah,
you speak the same language. It's good. It's quick.
absolutely. And while you're in the studio, do you have any apart from I suppose well, it includes the instruments as well. So, do you have any favorite tools and toys in particular? Like, there's obviously you spoke about how the tools are great and everything, but is there something you just every time you open it up or you pick it up, you're like, "Yep, this is it. I'm
Let's see.
using
Let's
this."
look around. I don't know. I mean, there's some of these
Oh,
over
nice.
here. There's some.
I got distracted directly to your oud because I play oud as well.
Do you
So it's
play
like,
oud?
I
It's
do,
such
I
a
do.
bitch to tune that thing, isn't it? I love it, but it's tuning it's tough.
Yeah, but it
I'm
gets stay tuned. Yeah,
I think it's it's yeah, the oud is one of my favorites. I love that. I'm a big fan of this Virus TI. I use that a bit.
Yeah.
Um, Little hardware synth. I don't know. I mean, I'm more into actually, actual instruments. So I'd
Yeah.
rather always like, you know, pick up something and shake it, if I
That's
can, like the
brilliant.
DAF or whatever. Yeah.
That's pretty. That's pretty cool.
And
Um,
obviously guitars. There's, I can go on and on about those forever. That's,
there's never enough guitars, right?
never. No.
I've got two ouds in the studio and four guitars. So,
Nice. You got two ouds. You got to show me, dude. I got to see this
actually,
oud.
give me a second. Let me. Let me grab. I could show you after, like right after we finish recording.
Perfect. Perfect.
um, but yeah. Last question, and this is always one I ask because I find it very important, and the answer is always very different. Sometimes they elicit laughs because of how unrealistic it sounds. How do you approach balancing your life with your work and your music?
Hmm.
You're laughing on the inside, I see.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing. Music is a cruel mistress, and if you let her kind of take over, she will betray you every time. So I think it's important to kind of like to push back a little bit. I love music, and it's been obviously, it's been my passion for my whole life, and it's been the way I've made my living as well. But it's one of those things where like it's almost like a drug. It's like you got to be careful how much you dive in.
Mm,
Um, and like I have a family. I got a couple of kids, and I'm married, and I know a lot of composers who, uh, they spend all the time at the studio. Some of them even are at home at the studio. They spend all the time in the studio, and they miss out on, a lot of the things they're supposed to be keeping track of in their regular life.
yeah.
And it's real easy for it to take over and kind of for there to be deficiencies in other aspects of your character. So to me, it's the thing of like really making a conscious effort to say, all right, you know what? Like I'm gonna take this weekend off, or I'm gonna like, I'm gonna stop working at 5 o'clock, pick up my kids, take them to practice, make sure I stop. I'm in the middle of this queue and I know I'm flowing right now, but I'm gonna stop and have, take a break and have dinner with the family, that kind of stuff. And because I went through phases where I wasn't doing that, and I think it was helpful at times in my career to just be pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is like, the challenge I'm facing now as somebody who's like, you work hard to like get in the business, you get some work, you get a career going. And then the challenge is now, okay, I have work. How do I get through this and not like turn into like a, you know, out of shape, like fat guy sitting in a chair? How do I keep my health from going to down the tubes?
Yeah.
How do I keep, my family life and all that cool? How do I keep, sane, and not having a heart attack from the stress?
Mm,
So I've developed a lot of, techniques to like literally keep some of the frustration that you come into in these projects at arm's length. Developing techniques for like, okay, whether it's literally breathing,
yeah.
like, okay, I'm not gonna react to this email or to this set of notes. I'm gonna breathe, sit back, I'm gonna take a jog, then I'm gonna like write the email.
Mm,
Or whether it's, in the situation I have where I have a team where it's like, okay, we're gonna get these notes, I'm going to have this guy here is going to handle this. We're going to go over what we're going to do. I'm going to oversee it, but he's going to implement this.
yeah.
This guy here is going to create the sessions so that I don't have to deal with like looking back at all the mess that we made over changes and picture cuts.
Yeah.
Finding those systems so that you can like keep from becoming like super frustrated, and you can keep also your 5,000 foot perspective.
Mm,
Um, that to me has been really crucial because I think like, I want to be able to like keep making music, you know what I mean? And keep feeling joy in it and keep being, able to enjoy my family. And there's so many composers like whose wives have left them and everything because they've just spent too much time in the studio.
Hmm.
So I think it's like any other job in that
Yeah.
regard. I mean, you can lose yourself in it, but I mean, the one thing we have is, they call it playing music.
Yeah.
You don't work music, you play music. We get to play all day. So, I mean, we're lucky in that regard.
That's fantastic. And lucky we are to have spoken to you today. Thank you very much
Yeah,
for your time,
indeed.
Tree. And
It's been a pleasure chatting with you, man.
the pleasure is mine. So the 100 on the CW and whatever other network in every other country gets CW stuff, and you can hear Tree's music there and check out his back catalog of amazing stuff and his band stuff as well, the Howling Volts and Tree Adams Band. Thank you, Tree,
Right
very
on.
much.
Thanks, man. Good talking to you, man.
You too.